Oh, sorry. Okay. Does anybody still need this page? So some fractures, like a fracture, like a hairline fracture, a fracture that stays closed, you don't need to have it set, but fractures that are displaced, you have to either have the doctor using his hands put it back into place, or having surgery where you have pins and screws put into it to put it back in the right place. Because bones cannot grow back if they're separate from each other. You have to have them touching for them to grow back. Or if they do grow back, it's not going to be straight.
If you like break your back, how are they going to put that back together?
Usually they have surgery and they have to use screws and rods to.
Do they ever come out or not?
It depends, but if it's a bad break, no, they just stay in for life. Yeah, yeah,
Is that super?
yeah. It is. And over time, it gets better, but yeah. There's better ways to relieve your pain than marijuana. They have much better drugs to use than that. What I mean is healthier drugs. Marijuana is terrible for your brain. Chapter 5, yeah. So we have this page down. Okay, so let's go through the fracture types in a little more detail. So transverse fracture is a fracture that goes through this way, through the bone. And if it's straight through, it's called transverse. Does anybody know what part of the body this is? That's right, the shin. Yeah, this is the shin bone. Do you know what that bone's called? Tibia. Femur is your thigh bone. So femur would be this bone up here. But this is tibia right here. And you have a smaller bone right here. You know what that is called? It begins with an F. Fibula, very good. Okay, so transverse fracture is a right angle, and so it's just straight through. It's not angled upward or downward. Usually through blunt force trauma. You don't need to write down apply perpendicular to the long axis of the bone. Don't worry about that part. You can just say blunt force trauma and just stop at that point. It's usually due to things like, like hitting it with something or having a car accident or falling on it. So this kind of bone would have to be set because, as you can see, it's not touching the right way. It's gonna, if it heals this way, it's gonna be crooked. So this kind of bone would probably just be set by hands, and then it would just, you'd use a cast to just keep it in that way for a while.
So
And
the doctors can just like feel.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And usually you're gonna have pain medication. Like you're gonna so because it'd be too painful if you didn't have any medicine for that. Is this person an adult or a kid? Can you tell from this picture? And how do you know it's an adult? Growth plates, that's right. Yeah, good. So like the growth plates have been closed up. You might see a faint line right here, but you don't see any gaps. You know it's an adult based on that. everybody on this page? Oblique fracture is similar to a transverse fracture. It goes all the way through. The difference though is it's at an angle. And so you have a 30-degree angle or 45-degree angle or so, or even more, but it's not straight through. It's not in a line that you know.
Wait, what was the last one? I didn't put this.
Oh, the last one? Oh, this one right here?
No, no, the last one, the one transverse.
What bone is this one?
Can't remember the name of it.
The bicep will be your muscle, but yeah, femur. This is actually your thigh. You see right here, the hip bone right here? So this is your thigh bone, your femur.
It's a femur, that's your femur bone.
So this is just like the transverse fracture. This is due to blunt force trauma. So it's the same reason as you get a transverse fracture. It's a fracture goes all the way through, usually from a fall or hard object hitting you, a car accident. So this is called a displaced because it's not, the bones are not in the same place as they were before. Oblique femoral, that's in the femur.
Oh, it literally said it on there.
Well, I mean, it didn't say femur exactly, but yeah, if you could, but it's better look at the picture, and try to guess. So this bone too would have to be set back into place because this is far out of alignment. Femur is the toughest muscle or toughest bone to break, so that requires a great deal of force to break it.
Wait, so you said that so you're on obviously pain medications and then the doctor would feel put it in place and catch you up. Are you awake during that?
Yeah, usually you are awake.
So
Yeah.
you can, see them doing it.
Yeah, usually, yeah. I know.
Did you request to be put?
They usually don't want to because there's more risk involved in putting you under. Because sometimes you don't wake up again. I mean, there's always a risk of being put under that you just don't ever wake up or you have bad side effects to the medication. So it's actually fairly risky. I mean, if you don't have to be put under, they don't want you to be put under.
Yeah.
So, do what? Who's liable for that? I mean, it depends. If they didn't mess up, if it's just a normal occurrence, then they wouldn't be. But if you can prove that they messed up some way, then yeah, they'd be liable for that. Green stick fracture. So you can see right here, these are all kids. We can see the growth plates. So this is really only happening in small children who have not finished growing because their bones are more flexible. It's much harder to break bones as a kid, like a young kid. So one side of the bone breaks, the other side of the bone just spins. So this is a similar reason as with oblique fractures and transverse fractures as why they get them. This would be due to a fall or blunt force trauma where they're hit by a really hard object.
You said it's likely happens in children?
Yeah, because really only children. Because an adult, the bone's going to just break. It's going to be a transverse fracture, oblique fracture. So this only happens in young children where their bones are more flexible. But yeah, for a baby or a young child to break their bone, that requires a lot of force. So they've sustained a significant injury if they've broken their bones. So it's called green stick because if you're trying to break a twig that's green in the middle, it bends but doesn't break. Do See what part of the body this one is?
Your radius.
Radius, very good. Yeah, so you can see right here the wrist bones up here.
So that's really, so that's like gonna be protruding, right? From the skin.
Yeah, that it's hard to tell exactly, but that definitely is gonna be a bump there,
Yeah.
and it might have broken the skin.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell from the X-ray if it did, but yeah, definitely you're gonna see a bump from the bone sticking out. Spiral fracture is next. So this one usually is from a twisting motion. So a torsion force is a twisting force. So these are commonly found in sports. When you planted your body in a certain way, you've been hit or tackled and you can't move out of the way. Or it's common in things like skiing too. For children, it's a common sign of child abuse because they're trying to they're being pulled in one direction and it causes twisting motion in their arms. This is a humerus fracture in your upper arm. Did we get that done? But there are doctors at hospitals whose only job is to look for child abuse. And so they would that's all they do, is that they would just look for things like that and report it to CPS. But what's really sad is that lots of times they get it wrong and they just look at just a picture and they say, oh, that looks like child abuse based on a picture. And it's hard to know just based on the injury itself. But a lot of times they make assumptions about that. And so there's so many stories about parents who have had their kids taken away from them because the kid had an injury that was not anybody's fault. The kid just fell down, but the doctors say, well, this is consistent with child abuse, and so we have to believe the X-ray, and that's all the evidence they have, and that's enough for that to happen. So
Just the X-ray.
just based on the X-ray, they say, well, just based on our evidence, that should be. I mean, it looks like it's only through abuse that those things happen. But there are times when, of course, it's not abuse, but the doctors don't always get it right. So hopefully that's going to change because CPS will take their word for it and just act on what the doctor says, but the doctor doesn't interview the family. They just looking at in a room, just the X-rays based on that.
Are there any other physical signs that they look for?
Well, of course, they look at the child themselves as well, but usually these are very, very young child, like children who can't really speak or, babies or preschoolers who really aren't able to describe things very well.
Yeah.
Because of course, if they're older, they can explain what happened, but if they're really young, then they don't really know what happened. They just have to guess. Comminuted fracture, this is when your bone shatters. You know, so when you have several bone fragments, usually 3 or more pieces for it to be comminuted. For a healthy person who's young and healthy, it requires a lot of force for this to happen. It's not as common of an injury. But it is more common in people who are older who have osteoporosis.
So it's like when you like shatter your kneecap.
Exactly, yeah. If you've shattered a bone, it's a comminuted fracture usually. And so if you're young and this happens, you've really had a great deal of force on your bone. So this shows you the kneecap being shattered. This happens when people are older because their bones become more hollow. As you get osteoporosis, the bone itself becomes very hollow and prone to these kinds of fractures. Linear fractures are basically just, breaks that are lengthwise. That can happen if you have a blunt force trauma, but it's not enough to penetrate through the bone. So these are breaks that don't go all the way through. So it'd be like a heavy object that hits you, but not enough to cause damage that goes all the way through the bone. That one usually don't have, of course, keep your weight off of it, so if this is your femur, so you have to use crutches, but yeah, as far as, you don't need to have it set, it's going to grow back on its own, and just keep your weight off the bone, it'll repair itself. So those are easiest to repair. They grow back the fastest. Compression fractures, that's only usually when people have osteoporosis that you see those. Common places for that would be your vertebrae as you get older, also your hip bone. Okay, before class ends, let me pass this out to you all. So this just shows you the different kinds of fractures. There's a few more we didn't go through. The one we didn't go through is impacted for eye. So impacted would be when when you're bracing yourself for a fall, for example, and the bone just breaks into the other bone. They get crushed. Fissure is basically a linear fracture. It's just a break in the bone lengthwise. The last one, avulsion, that's where a bone is torn off from a ligament or a tendon. And so you have part or a muscle that's tearing off part of the bone. You don't need to color this, it's just for information. Thank you. All right, so homework tonight is just, if you didn't finish it today, the worksheet from the movie, turn it in tomorrow, turn it in today, and this is just for your information to keep. Yeah, for,
Yeah. Oh, and her mother-in-law.
That's right.
Why did she say it?
I guess I didn't realize she was talking with so much evidence against her at that point. And she might have felt guilty, you know, as she was, I know she was actually. Oh, her father. That was definitely. You would feel bad. Like turn to those measures. I mean, like, obviously, like, she, obviously it's vicious, but I feel like it's more because she probably suffered definite, like, bleeding.
oh, I'm sure, she, yeah, I mean, either you're evil or you're mentally not there.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
mentally was not there.
Wait, do you not have it?
Oh, I do. I guess they're just a little bit late to come in today.